gives me the chance to talk about two things I'm really passionate about, which is one, learning, and how we get better conversations happening about learning, and how brilliant students can be when you give them that chance to do something that challenges them and the thinking in school, and the impact that can have. And for me, I've seen such huge changes, tremendous changes, and enthusiasm coming from both the students and the teachers, that I think it's something that I really want to share. So I don't mind if you don't want to do it when you've heard the talk, but I've really enjoyed it. If anybody does want to try something, please get in touch with me, because I love to share ideas. I'm doing currently a lot more things to do with students as well, some that I haven't had a chance to talk about today, some that are even happening today in school. And new ideas and working collaboratively with other schools is something I really enjoy, so do please get in touch if that's something you're into as well. I'm based over in Silicon Oasis at James Wellington Academy. Prior to that, I was based at Wellington International School, which is kind of where this started really. I'm here to talk about some of the projects that we did over there. The student lesson observers, our risky student planning, work-based student planners, our learning group, which introduced the learner profile and developed critical thinking across the school, and some action researchers, some IB students who did some action research as well. So those are just a few of the aspects of students as agents of change, as I call them, that we've done in school. I don't know if you're familiar with the schools, don't know what your background is with your own schools, but both Wellingtons are through schools, so they have students from 3 years old through to 18 years old, although we're not quite up to 18-year-olds at the academy yet, we will be. And they're both around 2,500 students in the school. They teach a mixture of the UK curriculum, so most of primary is based on the UK national curriculum, but with some alterations in terms of the units we teach. We move then into GCSE and then on into IB Diploma, and will be IBCC as well. So that gives you a little background on the kinds of school. One of the things that I think, rather than talking about numbers of students, type of curriculum, the thing that made Wellington International, and I hope will make our school, the Academy, truly unique, is whoever visits always comments on how outstanding the students are in terms of their learning. Their understanding of the learning process, the way they talk about themselves as learners, they are outstanding learners. And I'm convinced that it's giving them these kind of opportunities that's made them that way. It's the conversations that we've had. So, where did it all begin? Well, I don't know if any of you are familiar with John Hattie's work, looking at all of those hundreds and hundreds of different kinds of research projects that have happened in school. He brought together over 800 different studies and tried to pull out of it which things have made the most difference. And when he brought it all down to one statement, the statement he came up with is that the most impact on learning is when teachers see learning through the eyes of the students, when they become learners themselves, and when students see themselves as their own teachers. They become aware of what learning is about and actually engage to teach themselves rather than relying on somebody doing it for them. Which is what pushed me into wanting to get the students much more involved and get the teachers much more involved in doing something different that forced them to learn and come across in a different way. Now, when you talk about student lesson observers, student planners, people coming in and doing action research in your classroom, you might experience, when you first introduce it to staff, a little bit of a question mark, a little bit of uncertainty. Students are going to come in and watch my lessons, are they going to judge me? Are they deciding whether I keep my job now? What's going to happen? You can get a little bit of a question mark. Very quick to overcome that, but it's about building confidence, and part of that process is getting the right mindset. When I said one of my big enthusiasms was about learning, I think this is somebody who's probably had the most impact on me. I don't know if you've heard about her, a lady called Carol Dweck. She's written a book called Mindset and done a lot of research on intelligence, on whether intelligence, she looks at it in two views, a fixed intelligence and a growth intelligence, and talks about an absolute belief that intelligence and ability is not fixed, and talks about developing a growth mindset. Now, I'm not here to convince you today that one or other is correct, but what I will say is having a growth mindset completely changes your behaviour and your response to things. So whether you believe it or not, if you pretend you've got a growth mindset, life is a lot happier. And I'll tell you why. Because people who have a growth mindset approach challenges in different ways. A fixed mindset sees themselves as being capable up to a certain point. I'm only going to be so good at maths, at English, at science, whatever, dance, music. People are gifted that way, aren't they? You're only so good at it, you're born with it. That's a fixed mindset. A growth mindset is no. You've got certain amounts of potential and it depends what you do as to which ones you develop. And it's always possible to develop further. You may never develop to the same level as someone else, but you can always grow. Now, why does that make a difference? Well, challenges become a bit scary for people with a fixed mindset because they see a challenge every time they do something new that's difficult. It's a measure of how good I am at it. And they know that they can only go up to their ceiling, and when they've hit it, is this going to be the thing that exposes me as being at the top of my level? That's what a challenge is to them. So they worry about it. Oh, is this when they're going to find me out? Whereas a growth mindset sees a challenge as I only grow and get better at things when I do something new. So if I've got a challenge, now's my chance to get better at something brilliant. So it's very different. That goes into obstacles. They see an obstacle, if you've got a fixed mindset, oh, I've reached my limits, I might as well give up. I'm not going to be able to do it, am I? Whereas a growth mindset is, okay, well, if I've reached an obstacle, what I've learnt in the past is when I look at it in a different way or learn from someone else, I'll find a way around it. It means that they know you have to put an effort in. How many people with a fixed mindset go, oh yeah, you're only good at it if you do it easily. You can tell the people who are good at this because they get it straight away, it's easy. No, it just means they're sitting in their comfort zone and not pushing themselves, that's what it means. Because you only move on by putting effort in. So it's about effort. And growth mindset people know it's when you're putting the effort in, you get the best results. If you've taken the safe route and gone for the easy option, mindset, then you're not going to grow. There's a different response to criticism and feedback, and this probably links into things like lesson observations, planning, things like that. Feedback is useful. Feedback, if you're wanting to grow and get better, you're always asking people, so how did that bit work? What did you think to that bit? Can you tell me what was happening over there? You want feedback. You want somebody to tell you more, to give you information. Whereas fixed mindset see feedback as ways that people are measuring you against that ceiling, or they're telling me how close I am and whether I'm good at something or not. So they don't like it, they see it as criticism. And probably the clincher is the success of others. I don't know if you've seen it with your students, with your teachers. Fixed mindset people, there's a sense of jealousy over the success of others because they see life as a ranking scale. And when somebody else goes to the top, well, guess what that means for me? I must have moved down. So they try and knock people off the top. It's a different mindset. Growth mindset, they see the success of others as an inspiration. They go, wow, look at that. That could be me next week. That could be me next month. Completely different view. So for me, it all begins by trying to get the mindset right. I do that with the students, I do it with the teachers. I live and breathe growth mindset. To me, probably because I was brought up with a fixed one. And you know what they say about converts, it's always converts to the cause that are most passionate about it. To me, that was such a release. And learning about the growth mindset, I thought, wow, I can do something with that. And I don't want other people to be limited by what I was limited by when I was growing up. So I'll make sure everybody knows about it. You can take it or leave it, it's your choice. But it made a big difference for me. So I had to prepare the way. When you're taking on some projects, train the staff. Don't just throw things in randomly. Train the staff, train the students, so that when they come together, they work on something new together. And in a way, it's best to find something new, something that neither are experts at, but both have a contribution to make. Because that way, you're not setting one up as more expert than the other. And there's an interest, there's an intrigue, because you're working on something new. Now, what we did was we started to introduce what we called our learner profile. Are there any IB schools here? Yeah? So you know, learner profile. Learner profile, that focus on the attributes that somebody needs to be a really good learner. We were moving towards introducing IB, And we thought, yes, this is so true. All of these different aspects are something we should be developing. We should be teaching our students about what it means to be forward-minded, creative, responsible, resourceful, all of those things. It's good teaching them stuff, they need knowledge, they need to understand it, they need to build it into concepts, but most of all, they need to be good learners. So we started a whole debate in school about what it means to be a good learner, and even what's a good student versus a good learner. Is there a difference between the two? And that's where we started the conversation, but this is where we started to change things. Instead of the usual route where we go, right staff, got to do the learner profile, here's your training, do your training day, you learn all about it, and then go and tell the students that they've got to be that. That's the normal route. We did it the other way, and we started with students, and we had a student learning group, and they worked on the learner profile and what it meant, and their understanding of what it means for each of these attributes. They did the writing that goes into what is a collaborator, creative, and they presented it to the staff to say, this is our understanding of it as students. They presented it to parents. And the parents and staff groups worked together, and we came up with our learner profile. So we have our own school learner profile. So you can see we're already getting the vocabulary going, we're already getting the understanding going. So the conversations that happen between students and teachers, students and parents, parents and teachers, have this new vocabulary and a new understanding. And that's what we wanted to develop further. So okay, we've got our new learner profile. How are we going to teach it in the lessons? How are we going to get better at it? So that's when we started to have the conversation and introduce some groups. So that learning group then went on to do a number of different projects. They eventually grew into being our student lesson observers. So that was the group that started it all off. We had another group that we developed in IB, which was with our Year 12s. Those of you who've done IB and know about the extended essay, you'll know about that push to do some research. We pushed it with a few of our students to take it further than that and do an actual individual piece of action research in school that then selfishly became my action research to see what's the impact of students doing action research in school on teachers. So it was a bit circular. And then the final group was our student learning group in primary, because we felt it was so important to make sure primary were also developing these attributes, even though they weren't directly linked to the IB, because it was core to everything you do at primary, everything you do at foundation stage in primary. And it feeds through into secondary then, it keeps that link going. I think too many things like creativity, like resourcefulness, inquisitiveness, curiosity, it's not something you need to teach, it's something you need to teach again, because half the time they came into school with it and they lost it. It's about getting it back, isn't it, sometimes? So those were the groups. So I'll talk a little bit about each group in turn, and then if you want to know more details, I'm trying to keep what I say relatively short, so we've got a little bit of time for questions. I know we lost some time at the beginning, so I do understand if you're really hungry and just want to go for lunch at the end, that's fine. But if you want to stay and have some more details, I've got some more details about each of the groups. So the first group that we looked at was that learning group. We did the learner profile. We then wanted to spread it wider. You saw that, okay, they were quite a large group, but they weren't large compared to the size of the school. So the first thing we did was we got them to do a workshop to other students as well as doing this workshop to teachers. They planned the entire workshop day themselves. They did a workshop all about the learner profile and what it means to be a good learner. They had a number of activities built into it. They persuaded some teachers to do some hot seating about how they got where they were today and the learning they had to go through as part of it. They did a debate about what's a good student versus a good learner, and they worked on how they put the learner profile together and what it meant. And they presented a whole day to about 150 students. So quite a daunting task for them. They planned the whole workshop, ran all of the activities, prepared all of the materials, with our support of course. But having gone through that process, just think what they'd learned in terms of how to present something well. Well, not well, it didn't go well on the day, you know, the feedback that they got. And they were keen to see more. They were keen to get involved more. The teachers were talking to them in an interested way about the learner profile, wanting to introduce it more into their lessons. We wanted to take the lessons, particularly in secondary, away from being very textbook based. So we actually said, right, we're going to have a week where we don't teach anything from textbooks. Textbooks are banned. Worksheets are banned. We have a whole week. That caused a bit of consternation. We said, I'll tell you what, just to relieve the tension, we'll do it in June. It's okay. They've done all their exam prep, so it's not going to be a disaster. It's not that you've got to follow all of those textbooks. We've got some time in June because people are on study leave, so we've got that thinking time. We can do some things that are a little bit different. So we did what we called Risky June. And we got all of the students involved. They all came into a staff planning meeting. They stayed after school, all of our student learning group. And we'd done a little bit of preparation with them about the ingredients of a lesson. Obviously, we didn't try and cover an entire PGC with them before they came in, but they came in a little bit more aware of what the teacher is behind the scenes. We don't just rock up on the day and go, hey, I've had a good idea we could talk about last night. They actually prepare, they do their resourcing. So they came into our staff meeting, and each of them was assigned to a department as student planners. Student planners with a particular focus on the learner profile. So the teachers were thinking, how can I bring out the learner profile more in my lessons? How can I make my lessons really exciting and do something that has no textbooks at all? And the students were there to give them ideas. Well, you can imagine the meeting as it starts, you know, all the students shuffle in very much, yes sir, yeah, miss. They sit down in the group and the teachers are all talking and they're kind of on the edge. And then they start having the conversations and getting the ideas and involved, and they throw a few good ideas. Within 10 minutes, the barriers had gone down. The conversations were flying, the teachers were so excited about the students' ideas. We ended up not just with lessons planned around the students' ideas with a little bit of input. The teachers were going, well, you present that bit, let's do a lesson together. And we ended up with lessons where students were teachers, teachers were students. The whole thing changed. They were filming each other teaching. The students loved it. They went away and prepared some of the lessons on their own parts of lessons. They did co-teaching. So that whole time in June changed the mindset and got people to think much more positively about it. So then we cranked it up a little bit and said, do you know what, wouldn't it be great if all these students were really good at thinking of ideas for the learner profile, come into your lessons and see how you're getting on with that. So that's when we introduced the student lesson observers. Now we did have to do training with that. You can't just throw student lesson observers into a lesson, particularly if they're going to feed back to teachers, without training them on ways to do feedback, on ways to observe for particular things and how to have that dialogue. So we did have some training sessions for them. We let them practice on ourselves and come and watch lessons with us and feed back to us, and we told them how it felt to be fed back in that way. And do you think you might have started with this first? And how about you start something positive and then hit them hard? You know, so we went through all of that. We got volunteers. And I think with anything like this where you're going to move things forward in a way that might be a little bit different, a little bit scary for some people, start with volunteers. Because you shift it from you're going to do it or else, to getting a small group involved who get so excited about it, because of course they volunteered, that they start talking about it in the staff room and everyone else goes, oh, I wish I'd done that now. That sounds really good. So they get the buy-in. So we had about 12 teachers who volunteered to start. So the learning group went in and did lesson observations with them. They did 2 rounds of lesson observations. By then, the staff room was buzzing with it. And we were inundated with requests, well, can't I have one? I want a student lesson observer. And by the end of the year, we doubled up the number of teachers we got involved. And the year after, we were more than able to say, well, we'll do this with all our classes. Who wants to have a student lesson observer involved? And most people wanted to do that. We also tried to make it self-sustaining by having the group themselves run the interview process, part of the training process, so that it could continue in the school. So that was how that group grew. The next group was the primary learning group. So as I said, the learner profile didn't just sit up in secondary, we brought it into primary, where lots of good work's already happening in terms of creative curriculum, cross-curriculum teaching, lots of skill development, lots of interactive teaching. And so putting a learner profile in was a breeze. It just sat alongside everything else naturally. And the teachers loved it as an approach anyway. But what we wanted to do with the student learning group was start to build in them a confidence and an understanding about the learning profile so that they could get involved very quickly with some of the work we were doing up in secondary and sustain that and add to that. So we had a learning group that actually worked with Jane Simister, who's the lady you see in that picture there. She's done a lot of work on critical thinking. So again, we flipped it. Normally we'd have brought in an expert to train our teachers. We didn't. We brought her in to train the students. She trained a student group to deliver her workshop for her. So they had the training on critical thinking, all the resourcing. Then they actually delivered to first their entire year group, so a few of them in each of the classes, so they delivered to teachers and students alongside. They did a workshop with teachers, And then they did a workshop with parents as well. We ran it as part of our parental engagement. So they had quite a busy term running all of that, and introduced a lot of critical thinking activities and resources to those teams. Well, you can imagine the impact they had. They did a brilliant job of organising the lessons and representing the workshop. They introduced about 8 or 9 different critical thinking resources. But better than that, they pestered every teacher that they taught it to every day and every week to go, have you tried that 8-way thinking sheet yet? Have you used the inference group? How did the target thing go? Much more than I ever could as a leader. They relentlessly chased them down. And of course, everybody used it, because there was that push from the students up of saying, but this was a really good idea. This is a lesson we could use it in this. Have you thought about using this in this lesson? So they were introducing the ideas from within, and that's the kind of confidence that we were aiming to build. The conversations that were happening, and we saw this shift slowly start to happen between teachers and students, began to be about learning at a much deeper level. They were actually understanding the learning process and making ideas and suggestions about how their own learning could be made better, faster, quicker. If we tried this technique, or it worked really well last time when we worked in these groups, could we try that? They were making suggestions and talking to the teachers. The teacher was explaining more why they did certain activities in a lesson, not just get into groups of 4 and work on these. They were saying, I'm putting you into these particular groups because this is what I'm expecting you to get out of it. I'm hoping that you're going to work on this particularly or develop this skill or this attribute. I'm putting you in mixed groups because you two are expected to support one another. I'm using an expert group where you start separately and then come together, and it's your responsibility to make sure when you come back to your group that this is your contribution. So the conversations were very different around the learning. It wasn't just what we're learning, because you've all got to have a learning lesson objective. It wasn't even what attribute we're developing. It was why. Why are we learning this? The concept approach that you get through the IB, and why we're doing it this way. And is that working for you? And we've tried lots of ways in that lesson. Which one was the one that clicked for you? When did you get it? So those conversations have changed, which I thought was brilliant. The final group, the labels there. The final group was the action researchers. So again, I asked for volunteers, talked to the whole of the sixth form, said you've all done your extended essay, but how about you try for something even more challenging? Who wants to do a piece of action research? Now, we actually had action research going across the GEMS group as part of our teacher professional development, and Phil Lucas, Professor Phil Lucas from Winchester University, was over working alongside our teachers who were all carrying out action research projects. So when I went along, I said, well, are you happy if instead of me doing it, I bring some students and they're action researchers? And because of the type of person he is, Phil Lucas went, yes, please. So I took along my 6 action researchers. They had exactly the same training as all the teachers. They developed their own action plan. I didn't tell them what project. The only guidance that I gave them is I said I want it to be about collaborative learning, about grouping in some way. So they all had to go off and research different approaches to grouping, different approaches to collaborative learning, come up with their own thing that they wanted to research. I worked with them on what action research is about, how you plan it, how you put it together, so they put their own project together. Then they carried it out, they got volunteers, they came and presented to a staff meeting and said, I want to research about this, I need these particular year groups or these classes, who wants to let me do this? So they linked up with teachers, and then they carried out their research, analysed all their data, and presented it back. We presented it back at our own learning summit in a staff meeting, so they had 140 teachers in front of them, and they each stood up and presented their research, and they were very convincing. I mean, some of them, Ali at the top, one researcher, she was fabulous. She wanted to get into the theory of learning. So for her it was personal about, I want to explore a theory. She'd heard about VAC and wanted to look into visual audio kinesthetic, but her remit, she went, okay, they've upgraded it. It's not VAC anymore, it's VARC, because they've thought about reading and the fact that people like text. So I want to look at VAC, but what I'm going to do is first select my group to make sure they're all at the same level in terms of their art, because otherwise that's going to affect my results. Then she did a selection process and got all of her groups into the ones that were particularly visual, audio and kinesthetic. She understood that people have aspects of both, So she made sure she only had groups where there was a huge differential. They were very one aspect or the other, and then she had a mixed group. Then she created a series of tasks that were very visually based or auditory based or kinesthetic, because her theory was that if you're a particular type, you'll do particularly well on the task that matches your group, but not so well on the others. And the mixed group will do kind of okay on everything. That was her theory, and she put it into practice, and she was right, according to her results. She got a really amazing set of results. She presented them to the staff, and the staff were sitting there going, well, I'd heard about that, but never like this before. I'm amazed at the difference it made. And doesn't it make a difference in my class? So it made them think again about how they're presenting their materials and the kind of learning styles they're doing. Some others were very personal. We caught the year. She's very shy, very smart, very confident inside, but very shy about interacting with others. And she always felt that when she was forced to be in big groups, her voice was too small and she didn't really get heard. So she wanted to do some theory about size of groupings. And sometimes do shy people do better in pairs and smaller groups than they do in larger groups. So very personal to her, and she did a great bit of research on that, and it did show. So all of those times when teachers were pushing you, no, it'll do you good to be in a big group. Well, they didn't do her good, and it doesn't always do the shy people good. So she did a lot of research around that, and she worked alongside Vishal, who was also looking at group sizes, but because he thought that the size of a group should match the type of task you were doing, and that some sizes of groups were better for some types of tasks. So he did some research on that. Radon was all about, I don't think that you should have mixed ability groups. So he was all about you should separate out and put people according to their level, and did a lot of research on that. Yuvraj, he was about, I think you should be able to choose your own group. Teachers keep telling me which group I've got to be in, and actually I think that one of the key skills is being able to select a group that works well. And it won't always fail and go horribly wrong if you let us choose our own groups, so he did some research on that. And Megan was about, I think it'd be really good to mix different age groups together. And she did a research project where she got the bottom maths set in year 8, who was struggling with some of the concepts that the top maths set in year 5 were just beginning to cover. And she got the year 8s to come and teach the year 5s and work together, and saw the way that it lifted both of their performance and understanding. So great research projects, and I didn't tell any of them what to research. That was their own. You can imagine the impact that had on the staff. You should go, wow, what great ideas. They researched them really well, they presented them really well. The staff went out of that meeting, 81% found something that they all found it interesting, but 81% came out having had that light bulb moment going, wow, that really made me think. Whether it was to do with the back, with the pair grouping, the mixed grouping, it really made them think. And nearly all of them said they were going to go and try something new, and they did. My research was following up on doing questionnaires of the type of groupings that they'd use, the type of ways that they'd organise their classroom, and they all tried something new. That next 2 weeks, they all tried the whole way that they organised groupings. When I did demographics of the types of groups, the size of groups, it shifted like this on a daily basis. Whereas before it had been pretty steady. I always have 6 groups in my class because that's where my tables are set out, and I always produce 6 lots of resources. Suddenly changed overnight. Now, of course, people will default back to where they're comfortable, but it made people really think and use things in a different way. So those were the 3 groups that we did. So what's been the impact of that? Well, I genuinely think it's changed the learning conversations. The level at which the students speak to the teachers about learning and the understanding, and that doesn't necessarily come from the fact that I'm using students as student action researchers and observers. I think that probably has come from the topic that I chose as well, the fact that most of it was based around introducing the learning profile. So, you know, that was an added bonus I think we got from that. There was certainly a sense of excitement and discovery about what it is to learn, what motivates us, and it gave many teachers a new lease of life, a new excitement. They went totally from being converted to, I'm a bit scared about students coming in and telling me what to do, I've been teaching for 25 years, to, isn't this fun? And I feel like this renewed sense of energy, I'm looking at things in a new way and finding it exciting. There was a shared responsibility for learning, and that was really interesting. Because so much we do as teachers, we have to take responsibilities to how our students perform. Of course we do. We want to get the best out of them. But this really pushed it to show the students to realise that 50% of this responsibility is yours, maybe more. I'm about providing you with the conditions, the ability, I'm giving you the time, I'm giving you the right resources, but the interaction, you have to work with me on this. You have to understand what it means to be a good learner. You have to develop those attributes, and you have to apply them. So the discussion, that shared responsibility for learning, but two ways, because once you give that kind of responsibility for students, you have to be prepared for them to say, I would really like to be able to study this bit in this way. Is that okay? Or giving ideas for the lessons and having that feedback back. You can't have one without the other. Once you've ceded responsibility and some kind of autonomy, you have to work with that. But there was that willingness to take risks, to be innovative. Well, of course you can do that if the students are on board. If you're talking to them about why you're doing it, getting them involved in doing it, they make the risk safer. Because you're not just going into a lesson and going, oh, I'm going to try this new way out, I wonder how they'll take it. You've had the conversation. In fact, it might even have been their suggestion. So of course it's going to work, because they're going to work with you, and if it doesn't, they'll work with you to work out why it didn't work. Isn't that brilliant? Mutual respect and partnership, that's what it comes down to. And it changes that conversation, that relationship. That was the feedback from some of the students that took part in the action research. That was Ali's personal reflection that she sent through to me. She's got a very good way of phrasing things, but that was the philosophy that went behind a lot of the thinking of the students that were involved. They really appreciated us taking the time to share that responsibility and have the discussion, to see that responsibility and be control to them. So what next? So if you're going to give it a go, if it's inspired you and you want to try something, start small. It doesn't have to be some massive great project that you're going to run across the whole school with 150 teachers. Start small and do it well, because that will be the buy-in to get other people involved. We didn't do student lesson observers with everybody overnight. We started with a small group of 2 or 3, built up to 10. Suddenly everybody wants to get involved because we did it well. Build that capacity. You saw how with the learning group they went from developing the learner profile, they spread it out to more. Then from that group we did the planners, we did the student lesson observers. So you build the capacity as you go along. We built the capacity in primary by having that learning group that did critical thinking, that built that group so when they go into secondary they're excited about being part of some of the opportunities. Create a desire to be part of it. Talk to people about how it works, how exciting it is. Get them into the growth mindset. Get them wanting to do something. Set a date. It never happens if you don't. There is never a good week to do it. Doesn't matter what week in the calendar you look at, there'll always be a problem. So set a date and stick to it, no matter what. And I know how that feels because we're actually doing something in school at the moment. My school have introduced a different approach to lesson observation called Instructional Rounds, which was brought across from the US. I'm doing it with a group of students and teachers. Instead of it being a top-down across a network with supervisors and principals, I'm doing it with 15 students and 15 teachers. And I'm doing it yesterday and today because I hadn't got this date through at the time. I wasn't going to change it, so I've rushed out. They're all doing the lesson observations at the moment, and I'll go back and we'll be pattern seeking and putting together the results of what we've done. So whatever happens, commit to it and just do it. See it through. Fit it in with your priorities, yes, but that's what we did with the learner profile. Not just priorities in terms of timings, but priorities in terms of what you want to move forward in school. I'm sure that the success from our projects came from the fact that it hinged on something new we were trying to introduce, which was that learner profile approach and that split screening of lessons, so you're developing the attributes of a learner alongside their knowledge and understanding. The permission to do it has to come from the top down. If there's not the support at the top of school, it won't happen. And that's key, which is probably why it's you that I'm talking to, because you'll make it happen. That's who's got to do it. It's got to come from that level of leadership to give permission for this to happen and to make it happen and get that buy-in. So thank you. I don't know if you've got any questions. That's a little glimpse of what we did yesterday. That's our instructional rounds that we're starting. So The projects are ongoing, they're never ending. There's always something new to do, there's always something new to try. The next thing we're moving on to is our student leadership programme, developing an actual leadership structure, something that comes out of that where they have a qualification, but they're part of developing leadership within school and training alongside our living leaders in school. So, if any of you out there try something and it works really well for you, please tell me. I love new ideas and I'd love to try something new. Or try something in 2 different schools and we'll see how it works in different contexts. But that's me, that's some of the projects that I've done, and I hope that's given you a little glimpse into why I think it's so important. Does anybody have any? Or you're hungry and want to which one? I don't mind either way. Yes?
If I do implement some of your suggestions and I need help to call you, will that be all right?
Absolutely. If you want my email address, and if there's anything I can do to help in giving you, I don't have all the resources that we've used, but I've got some of them. So, you know, the PowerPoint for a student workshop, for example, the leaflets that we use, you know, I can help out with the practical.
The board idea exactly what steps you should take, how exactly you're going to about that. She said,
Absolutely.
Just a glimpse.
Please contact me. If there's a particular project, I did think whether I wanted to go into more detail or try and give you a flavour of all of them. But I'm absolutely open. If there's one that particularly excited you and you want to find out more about it and the practicalities, please do contact me and I'll let you know more specific details about the steps we took. Of course, you can't just transplant it in different contexts, but I can give you as much help as I can. Yeah, thank you.
For every group, they were trained. So who was responsible for the training? I know one of them was an expert that you brought in from outside to train the children. But is the rest of the training, is it your responsibility or a shared responsibility by the teachers?
That responsibility moved depending on the groups, and it was teachers who were particularly passionate, either they'd already come having had experiences before, or really bought into the concept I was selling and wanted to get involved. A lot of the time they didn't know where to take it, and we worked it out together and said, you know, what could we do as a workshop? What would be the best thing to try? And we worked it out together. So there were probably about 7 or 8 key teachers who kept working on this and worked with groups and helped with the training and supported with that. But that keeps growing because as soon as someone takes part, they then want to lead something themselves.
And this group, what were they motivated by? Was it just passion, or is this part of their professional development?
A combination of the two. The start of it all came from a colleague of mine who were both very passionate about the growth mindset approach and Carol Dweck. Caroline had come from Villiers College in the UK, who did a lot of work with Paul Guinness, and she'd actually been running some student lesson observers in the school that she'd done before. So of course she arrived having experienced all of that and wanting to put it into our school. And I was, yes please, let's go. But then it's about persuading people and getting other people on board. But gradually that group built up, and the more you do, the more people see it and want to do something themselves. Or be part of something else. You split into 2 groups, don't you? I want to be part of it, or I want to try something myself. And that's where you have to support as a leader and give them that opportunity, find them the time. It's not necessarily about a post of responsibility, but often it is about finding them the time, the space to do it, the thinking time and the time to deliver. So it's about that cover and producing that.